Uh, Good morning, everyone. This next subject is Maritime Mumbai, Commerce, Contestations and Connectivity by Commodore Odakal Johnson, PhD, Director and Head of Research, Maritime History Society. Now, through time, many have perceived the sea to be a barrier to cross in order to reach other lands. On the contrary, the sea has been a connector of communities and cultures, very different from the lack of sea-mindedness seen today. Indian seafarers have been using their sound nautical knowledge for ocean crossing much before Hippolytus' so-called discovery of monsoon winds. The seafarers used these seasonal monsoon winds to determine their sailing patterns and navigated the high seas, passing down this knowledge over generations. This also led to the mingling of various cultures. The extended Mumbai metropolitan region, MMR, of today has points of contact in this waterborne connectivity. The transoceanic culture connectivity mutually enhanced trade as well as religion. That close correlation became evident in most ancient religious places in close proximity of rich trading towns. Such maritime connects leave built heritage in the form of monuments, sculptures, pottery, art, etc. A mix of historical as well as archaeological data is found in MMR geography, which backs up monumental material evidence, delivering a treasure of history. Excavations at several sites in Maharashtra yielded enough evidence to date overseas trade as far back as the Chalcolithic period. From the early historical period, we find evidence of ports which were dominating the Arabian Sea, namely Kalyan, Sopara, Puri, Thana, Chaul, and many more. Records ranging from the Jatakas to foreign accounts such as the Periplus. Being graced with a natural harbor, the cluster of 7 islands, who once upon a time contested for power, grew to be the metropolitan city as a distinctive and representational cosmopolitan of India. Even though Mumbai lacks rivers as navigable as in the cities in the Coromandel coast, it still has preeminent trade connections overseas. This talk aims to provide a broad insight into the maritime journey from Bombayam to Mumbai, with water as a means of connectivity through commerce and contestations. So over to you, Commodore Johnson. Commodore Johnson, please unmute.
Uh, good morning, everyone. Yes, we're just setting up. So as I just requested, if we begin with, in addition to me, the entry called MHS Tech to be co-hosted, because Adarsh, who's manning that, will be sharing a number of videos. And we'll begin with the first video, and then I'll give my opening remarks. The login participant shown as MHS Tech, if they could also be co-hosted. And then to make it easy, all my team members have a prefix of MHS, so that will probably help. And Adarsh, as soon as you find yourself available, please share the screen and begin with the first clip. So I think by the time the tech backend is setting up, it was fascinating to hear Ramesh, not Ramesh. Ramesh, of course, we've been hearing through this last few days, but to hear Venkatesh and stealing some of our thunder through his fabulous work of photography, architecture, and as I said, we are not allowed to share all his skill set, which this thing. And yeah, Ramesh, I'm quite okay. Sometimes this takes a while. We have so much in store for us that we promise we will not eat into your lunchtime. Otherwise, you might eat us. So, but while we are doing that, I have a couple of things. I had planned it for an opening video, and then that happens. Let me just see if okay. Uh, and that is going to make technical challenges greater to this amazing Asiatic Society of Mumbai team. It is fascinating to know that just in the geography of the iconic steps, when I was a little older, sorry, a little younger, that is when when Madhuri Dixit danced her heart out, Ek Do Teen, on the steps of the town hall. You know, that iconic image stuck, and then you have the Horniman Circle, and you have everything. Uh, we are in the same uh, premises, same geography.
Ramesh, you say that, yeah, because I don't want to switch on my audio.
Okay, this is cool. This is Mumbai, right? And we are going to take you completely and make you all at sea. If we are not able to show the videos, we will bore you a little with fascinating facts. Okay, wonderful. That was me trying to just gain time. Adarsh, you are ready. Can we have the first clip?
Every city has a story, a history, and a legacy, which inevitably become the central theme in defining its character. This is also the case with present-day Mumbai, which over the years has seen power transitions and a distinct commercial and maritime evolution. Over centuries, hard-working and result-oriented people of this city have displayed tremendous enthusiasm and dynamism. And this dynamism can be traced back to early seafarers who saw great potential for trade and commerce in this motley group of islands. Interestingly, a common thread in all this has been the Navy under different hues and under different flags, from the Portuguese to the East India Company, thereafter the Royal Navy and the Royal Indian Navy, and then the Indian Navy. Through this film, it is our endeavor to showcase the captivating story of Mumbai's maritime heritage.
Thank you. And with that, here is my first request to this amazing neighbors of MHS. You know, from my office corner, of course, my researchers have pushed me out of my office. I used to have a very corner office, and from there I could just peep out and see in a particular angle Asiatic Society of Mumbai and the town hall. So every day at 5 p.m. before the pandemic hit, there used to be like a school children exploding out of RBI some noise. And I want to begin with that kind of noise. Can I ask the organizers for 30 to 40 seconds to unmute everybody? And can we have a typical Mumbai cacophony? If you find it unmanageable, mute everyone except the co-hosts. Can we do that? Ramesh, I'm sorry, I had planned. This is different. So just make some noise, put some chat. Okay, do that. Or whoever has the audio, just tell what do you love about Mumbai?
Everything.
Or too short. I thought you will go more. Anyone else? Just whoever can unmute, just my team, make some noise. Oh God, I thought I was a military person who was very disciplined and organized. I didn't know that rest were Okay, doesn't matter. That's okay. We will go further. Thank you. In the days when we could just freely mingle and gather, in the evening, if you were outside Churchgate, and before they, went everything making that subway, that line outside Churchgate, which a classic constable would hold the line, or outside CST, people milling around, that is Mumbai. But in that process, we sometimes forget that if we step a few hundred meters away, you look to the sea. Friends, Mumbaikars, and my fascinating maritime Indians, welcome to a journey where you need to stop looking at the sea and look at the city from the sea. And if you haven't done that, invest wisely, and we will someday give you a ride and show you the city from the sea. Okay, that's another day and another business. So that is the great journey that we promise. But I want to come back. This movie, the clip that you just saw, Admiral Luthra, when he was a commander-in-chief 2 years ago, he gave MHS this task to steer this. And so some things, you'll see some very familiar faces in very different shapes through the clips, which we have broken up into parts. So with that, let me go to very origin, the geomorphology of Mumbai. Adarsh, clip number 2, please.
Pride of a nation, sentinel of India's waters, its ports, its people. The Indian Navy. A force that has shared its destiny with that of a megapolis. India's financial powerhouse. 12th richest city in the world. Home to over 20 million people. A city of dreams. Mumbai. Ever felt while riding a Mumbai local that you may be traveling over an island? Ever wondered while cruising through the Queen's Necklace why Marine Lines is named so? Ever imagined during good and bad times how the famed spirit of Mumbai originated? Thousands of hands joined to build a city from scratch that only a few hundred years ago were 7 marshy Punjab islands. Colaba, Bombay Island, also known as the Isle of Bombay. Old Woman's Island, also known as Little Colaba. Mahim, Mazgaon, Parel, Varli, and the mainland, Salsette. Early visitors from sea saw what only experienced seafarers would. A perfect natural harbor. Somewhere behind these walls of Mumbai's naval dockyard lives that 500-year-old story. A story of origin of this magnificent city, and along with it, the story of its loyal defender, the Navy. It's hard to separate one from the other. Just like all life on Earth, this city too was born out of the sea.
And so it's time for me to bring in one of my team members, Aishwarya. you can switch on your camera, and Aishwarya is an archaeologist, is been part of my team working on built heritage. So welcome, Aishwarya. And I want you to talk to the people about, most people have this understanding of Mumbai of a few hundred years. And I liked what Aslam was sharing yesterday, that Mumbaikars means only the Kolis, Boris, and Bhandaris. We all are immigrants. Okay.
Yeah.
But I want you to go even further, because I've got somebody else to talk of the community. Talk to us about prehistoric, before time. So Aishwarya, over to you.
Yes, so sure. First of all, good morning, everyone. Uh, so, when we talk about Mumbai, I think usually history itself tends to focus on kings and dynasties. But it is very interesting to understand that cultural heritage of people in Mumbai goes back to before arrival of the colonial past. And we already have found artifacts dating right from Middle Paleolithic period to maybe Shilahara period as well. Like from 30,000 years ago to Shilahara period, which dates back to more than 1,000 years ago. So now we can come to know that history of Mumbai began earlier than popularly believed, and geologists believe that the coast of Western India came into being around 100 to 8 million years ago, and the tectonic activity in this region led to formation of hilly islands separated by shallow sea. And then we know that Mumbai became cluster of 66 villages. So Pleistocene sediments found near Kandivali in northern Mumbai by British archaeologist Malcolm Todd in 1939. He was the first person to indicate habitation since Stone Age period in Mumbai. So later after him, even archaeologists like Sankarias or Kalapesi, they contributed to understand prehistory of Mumbai. And then we have Marvezetti, Bald Hill, Yerangal Hill, Mud Hill, then Pali Hill, and many other places. Kandivali is a very well-known prehistoric site. So, however, I think there is again a huge scope in realizing prehistoric potential of the coast of Mumbai. And I personally feel systematic exploration again along the coast may yield significant discovery, and maybe large clusters of sites and lithic assemblages would shed light on prehistoric past of Mumbai. So this is what I feel about prehistoric origin which Bombay has, which is comparatively unknown or lesser known, I would say. Over
Thanks,
to you, sir.
thanks, Aishwarya. I know for you it's early days, and there are very senior and eminent archaeologists who are gurus in this thing. But don't worry, the way we are going to bring a greater awakening and awareness. So thanks, Aishwarya. With that, let me switch and bring in Dennard. Dennard, yeah, you're already on camera. Dennard is a fascinating student of ancient Indian culture, history, and we have managed to marinate him. You know, don't ask me what was the process of marination, but now he loves the maritime component of ancient Indian culture. One of the things that he's working on is communities. And I just mentioned, you know, everybody in Mumbai except a few are immigrants. So Dennard, share some thoughts that you have found with comes to coastal communities and activities in Mumbai from a maritime point of view.
So, good morning, everyone, firstly, and good morning, sir. Firstly, there are actually, if you see, there were actually many communities that resided in Bombay. We may not know whether they are prehistoric in nature or were they actually immigrants like the rest of us are. There are by and large three communities that I have been, three classes of communities that I have come across in the city of Mumbai, in Mumbai itself, before the arrival of the British. You had the working classes, which comprised mostly of Kolis and Nagaris and, Bhandaris. So the Kolis were kind of involved in more seaward venture. The Agris were involved in terms of creating salt, and the Bhandaris were in terms the toddy tapper, and they also kind of were into the business of producing merchandise from toddy, from the palm tree. The administrative classes that by and large comprised the island were the Pats Kalshis, the Pathare Prabhus, and the CKPs, the Chandraseni Kayastha Prabhus. Now, these probably had entered the island in the medieval era. Talking about the Pats Kalshis or the Pathare Prabhus, they actually were from the lands above the Ghats, so where they came from places like Paithan. And along with them, they brought an entire entourage of courtiers and priests and all, and they settled in the island, settled in Mahim, which is generally regarded to be the Mahim of today's day. Although there are some contestations, some believe it's north of Vasai. But yeah, that's one class of people. Then you have the priestly classes. The Shilaharas, for example, the priestly classes also entered into the broader proscenium of the Mumbai region. You had the Banganga, for a classic example, which became one of the important Tirtha Sthal, and you find mentions in the Skanda Purana. So these priestly classes also contributed in terms to the ancient face of Bombay. So all of these communities lived in some form of symbiosis. They each produced and they supplied it to the other, and the other had something that they would supply to the rest of the communities. So however, I stay in Chembur, which was once upon a time a what is a Fulwadi, where a lot of flowers used to grow out here, and now all of a sudden it's just disappeared with the rise of the whole real estate market. So yeah, Mumbai was actually, in terms, you see, always inhabited, not that it was just a barren piece of land. People did reside on the island for many thousands of years. That's it.
So great. Before I let you go, if you come to the Mumbai of today, one of the things that you spot is this word called Mumbaikar is not a regional word. Mumbaikar, I think, is a way of life, is a sense of identity. From a classic student of communities, what would you define a Mumbaikar, especially from a maritime perspective today?
For me, a Mumbaikar is a person, if I look at it from the maritime front, is someone who has, intertwined his identity with the island nature of this multipolis, or sorry, you would cosmopolis.
Yes.
And it is, one doesn't forget that, Bombay is an island. It is not attached to any form of a land. So in that sense, it has its own identity, its own flavor, an all-encompassing, all-embracing flavor. So a person who understands and identifies himself as a Mumbaikar is a one who identifies his close connection with the sea. That for me is what a Mumbaikar is.
Thank you, Dennard. And that's also an appeal to the people who are watching in. Remember, you become a Mumbaikar by choice. You become a Mumbaikar by residence. You become a Mumbaikar by a sense of thought. And please remember, if you are a Mumbaikar, the sea is a part of you. But it's time to step a little back into history. And as we set up this next set of videos, Adarsh, begin with the video, and let's go somewhere some 500 years ago. Over to you, Adarsh.
It was an age of exploration in Europe. Explorers were in a rush to find the fastest sea route to India. Sailing for almost a year around the continent of Africa, Vasco da Gama became the first European to reach India by sea. In 1498, he successfully landed in Calicut. And with that, he opened the doors of India to the Portuguese. A sea-borne empire, the Portuguese looked for more ports on the Indian coast. During the 16th century, Mughals were the dominant power in India. But on the west coast, Sultan Bahadur Shah reigned over Gujarat and these 7 islands off the coast of Konkan. In 1509, a Portuguese fleet entered the waters of Bassein, the modern-day city of Vasai. On board was Francisco de Almeida, the Portuguese viceroy to India.
Portuguese ships that came in were far superior to anything that we had in India. And they mounted far more guns, they were larger, they had larger cargo holds, so they needed sheltered harbors. And there was nothing like a beautiful sheltered harbor off the seven islands of Bombay.
What Almeida saw left him captivated. He wanted Bassein. The Portuguese intimidated and attacked Bassein outpost repeatedly for nearly 25 years.
So they just ran like a hot knife through butter to Bassein fort. But the reality of it is that Bassein fell almost without a whimper. And by capturing Bassein, everything south of Bassein was now virtually defenseless as far as the Gujarat Sultans were concerned.
Now it just happened that at this time, the Mughal Empire Humayun was attacking the Sultan of Gujarat from the north. And so the Sultan did not want enemies on both sides, and he hurriedly sued for peace. A peace which was signed on board a galleon in the harbor of Bassein in December of 1534. And by this treaty, all the islands and territories of Bassein, including Bombay, Thane, Salsette, all came over to the Portuguese.
That day forward, the islands of Bombay belonged to the Portuguese. They called it Bombaim, which meant the good bay. The Portuguese divided Bombay into manors or fiefs. One such manor was the manor house inside Bombay Castle.
Amazing. And with that bit of a visual, it's time to bring in another one of my research associates, Janvi Lokegaonkar, a postgraduate in history. And we have somehow managed to, convince her from her interest in the last few hundred years in military maritime history. Janvi has broken out of her comfort zones to go into more ancient. But Janvi, specifically on this period of Portuguese, what have your investigations revealed and talked about? So share with us Janvi, of this period before we come to the British?
Good morning, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
A little garbled, but just keep the mic close, and I think just continue. Don't worry.
So, contrary to the perception that Portugal had no territorial empire in the East, between the 1530s and 1740s, they had managed to establish their sphere of influence in a around about 220-kilometer long province on the western coast of India. After establishing their presence in the Malabar coastal region and a firm foothold in Goa, the Portuguese moved northwards. They established their settlements in Daman, Diu, Chol, Bassein, Salsette, and Bombay. This was called as the Northern Province. It was around 1531 the Portuguese fleet entered the Banda Creek and defeated Mahim Fort, exhibiting their naval might. In 1533, they gained Bassein, which is modern-day Basai, Salsette, Elephanta, and Agashi, in return for peace from Sultan of Gujarat. He also ceded the 7 islands of Bombay, which became a part of the Portuguese territory. The Portuguese had used Bombay as a naval base in their conflict at sea with the Mughals and against the British. The harbour was a small fort to the south of Bombay Castle and was described as a strong warehouse. The Portuguese in India considered Mumbai harbour as a lucky harbour, and they were reluctant to give it up. Hence, the transfer of Bombay Island to the British was not without friction. In the next video, we will see how Bombay becomes a part of a dowry and slips away from the Portuguese control. Can we have the next video, please?
We can't hear you.
The English marked their arrival in India by firmly entrenching themselves at Surat. To safeguard their trading interests in this area, they needed a strong local navy, a local marine. It became the genesis of the Indian Marine, which in later years would transform itself into the present Indian Navy.
They could not recruit white sailors, so they recruited the local Bhandaris, Agris, and other communities, coastal communities connected with the sea.
It began as a motley bunch with garbs, derived from the local word gurab and galavats. The English called it the grab service. Slowly, over time, it acquired more muscle. In 1661, the newly crowned King of England and the Portuguese crown met to forge a new alliance. It changed the course of history forever. Bombay was to become a wedding present.
There was a marriage treaty which was signed between King Charles II of England and Catherine of Braganza. The treaty is also commonly known as the Passion Treaty. It was a marriage of political alliances. By this treaty, the Portuguese promised to hand over Bombay, Tangiers, and a sum of £500,000 to Charles II as a marriage gift to him.
The British finally got a toehold. They didn't get a foothold, they only had a toehold. And that was the island of Bombay. And from there, history was never the same. Portuguese Empire in India was doomed the day the British set eyes on Bombay.
But when the news reached the Portuguese viceroy to India, he refused to obey his king's orders. In an act of defiance, the Portuguese did not part with any territory of Bombay, especially the islands of Salsette, Mazgaon, Varli, and Parel.
The Portuguese were not willing to give up Salsette because it would take away the huge revenues that they had from Salsette.
Prolonged delays led to King Charles II sending a delegation to lay siege on the islands of Bombay. It took 3 years of coercion and negotiation from two English governors, Sir Abraham Shipman and his successor Humphrey Cook, to finally get possession of the islands.
Humphrey Cook, his secretary, was handed over the island of Bombay. The other islands were not handed over. As per the treaty, they were not given.
Through further negotiations, the English managed to get Mahim, Sion, Dharavi and Wadala from the Portuguese. But after the English crown acquired Bombay, they found little use of Seven Marshy Islands, and so they decided to rent it out to the English East India Company. On 27th March 1668, the English East India Company was handed Bombay for an annual rent of £10.
Okay, Janvi, earlier we couldn't hear you clearly, so let's see if your audio is better. And can you just repeat some points from the earlier part, and how do the Portuguese miss the opportunity beyond it being a political transition, and how does it transfer to the British? So let's see, I know with your video on, let's hear your inputs, Janvi.
Is it better now?
Unfortunately, I think your earphones, there's too much of a garble. Can you just try direct mic? Your wireless headphones may be creating a bit of an issue. Anyway, go ahead and just speak briefly. We'll see, and maybe we'll bring you in once again, but just try. This is tech challenges in our online component. Okay, what by the time Janvi tries to sort, so what Janvi has been studying this whole transition, and so she's just, okay, by the time she comes in, the Portuguese had this area covered, they were building, but thanks to a political alliance, people in the continent did not pick up the local inputs, and moment Portuguese lose Bombay, they actually lose a major component, and finally it was the English gain. Janvi, are you back? Otherwise, we'll probably go ahead to the next, maybe. Okay, no issue. We'll still bring her in the later part of the conversation. Adarsh, can we go to one person who became a thorn in the English crowd? Adarsh, video 7.
But one individual changed everything. The Maratha king, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. In the year 1664, he raided Surat.
Amongst all the medieval rulers in India, Shivaji Maharaj was possibly the only ruler who realized the importance of a potent naval force. With his fledgling navy, he incessantly raided Surat, which was a leading maritime port of those days. And because of these raids, the importance of Surat as a port gradually declined.
With Surat under threat, the English needed a new headquarters.
Shivaji had been attacking Surat regularly. There was plunder there, and the Tapi was getting silted. Ships were finding it difficult to come all the way to Surat, and therefore they wanted someplace else. That is the reason for them wanting to have Bombay.
They transferred the naval units to Bombay for their own protection. They came to Bombay for the simple reason that Bombay was an island, or actually 7 islands at that time. There was no connection with land. So there was no threat from land, as opposed to Surat.
When the shift finally took place, it was under Gerald Ongier, governor of the East India Company, and a visionary who saw the potential of Bombay. Onjia realized the need to fortify Bombay against the Marathas and Mughals. Also, he recognized that Bombay needs to be settled, for which he needed to bring people from the Indian mainland.
So he promises people two things. One is religious freedom and the other one is a tax holiday. The Dawoodi Bohras, you have the Parsis, you have the Jews, the Armenian Christians. They're all going to come here, settle down. They're allowed to run their businesses freely. They're allowed to practice their religion. And so you have this early settlement.
Onjia set up the Mint House to have one common currency for Bombay. His various policies showed results through a rise in revenue and population. According to a survey, population of Bombay rose 6-fold under Onjia. But his most ambitious plan could only take shape after his time. The fortification of Bombay. It took 40 years for the plan to finally develop, and the task to complete it went right up to the 19th century. With the fortification of Bombay Island, the English were able to ward off the threats from the Mughals and Marathas to an extent. But the Marathas had something more that troubled the British. An admiral and his navy who earned both their fear and respect. This was Maratha legend Kanoji Angre.
Born to Sarkhel Sekhoji Angre, who was Shivaji's admiral, Kanoji succeeded him as the admiral of the Maratha Navy. If I have to name one individual who was instrumental in checking the designs of the English on the west coast of India, it would be Kanoji Angre. During his reign as the admiral of the Maratha Navy, he reigned supreme on the west coast of India, and the English could never overcome.
So that was a fascinating part, and Renu has shared a list of readings, but I must just at this point mention you heard two people. You've been, of course, hearing some very familiar faces on the clips, Kurush and Dr. Floor and Dr. Rashna. You know, it's very nostalgic to hear Admiral Avti, the late Admiral Avti, and you will be surprised of how much he has been instrumental in resuming this maritime journey of Bombay and beyond. And of course, who else than my predecessor for 15 years, Commander Mohan Narayan, who's here. Thank you, sir, for all that you have done. So they were there. And with that, there are many people who made this whole session possible. The Naval Dockyard has put together a clip, and we want to show you a brief part of what they have shared about how, and we'll talk about it, how Naval Dockyard or Bombay Dockyard became a key part. So Adarsh, video 7A.
Work on building the marine dockyard soon began. The yard became a wholesome facility in 1735. The East India Company brought in Parsi carpenters from Surat in 1736, of whom Lordji Nausirwanji Wadia was appointed master builder. He and the next 7 generations of Wadia served as the master builders for the company. The yard continued to expand, and the first dry dock, called Bombay Dock, was constructed and put to use in 1750. Between 1736 and 1821, 159 ships of over 100 tons were built at Bombay, including 15 of over 1,000 tons. Ships constructed in this yard were said to be vastly superior to anything built anywhere else in the world. True testimony to the quality of Malabar tea and capability of artisans shaping them into those lethal men of war and all-weather merchantmen for the Royal Navy, East India Company, the Bengal Pilot Service and private merchants.
From building smaller ships The yard progressively developed the capability to build ships of larger displacement and better fighting capabilities. Ships such as Cornwallis, Asia, Calcutta, and Ganges had a displacement of 2,298 tons and 84 guns. The largest ship built by the yard was of 2,591 tons, which was built with 80 guns in 1848. Punjab, later renamed as Tweed, is reputed as one of the fastest sailing ships built to date.
HMS Trincomalee, which was built for Royal Navy by the Mumbai Naval Dockyard in 1817, is the second oldest ship afloat today. Berthed at Hartlepool, UK, the ship has literally sailed through time, putting in more than 200 years of service.
So this is a very important stage to look at what is the impact of this part of history. And for that, I want to bring in another one of my young, bright, chubby, cheerful, not chubby, okay, Amrita Talavedekar, a postgraduate in architecture, a budding expert in urban conservation. She has been mentored by some very important people in the MRC. So welcome, Amrita. Share with us your thoughts of this part of Mumbai's history, the dockyard, and how does it affect the city? What role does dockyard, shipyards play? How has it defined us? So let's hear
please
from you.
unmute yourself. Yes, I trust I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yes, so like you all saw in the video, by the early 18th century, Bombay had begun to emerge as a very important trading port of the English. And that's when they realized that there was a need to develop a lot of infrastructure to cater to this trade. So they needed more ships, they needed more docking facilities, and they needed docks. So that's when Lauji Nasavanji, a carpenter from Surat, was invited. And so large ships began to be built in Bombay. And that's when the Bombay Dry Dock, which is like the first dry dock in Asia, was built by the Wadia brothers in 1750, like you all saw in the video. And subsequently, as there was a rise in trade that took place, and then you have opium and cotton trade boom in the city. So that's when opium was traded with China, and that's also when the American Civil War had taken place, and cotton trade in the city had reached all the skies. And that's when a number of private docks were also being constructed to cater to this trade. So you see a lot of magnificent buildings. Since there was a lot of money that came into Bombay, there was a lot of magnificent buildings that came up. You see lots of huge buildings coming up at Oval Maidan. You see buildings up around Horniman Circle. So all this money was used to build up the infrastructure of Bombay. Also, the 7 islands that you see, there was reclamation that took place, and these marshy 7 islands were turned into one consolidated island. And that's where
so
Bombay
Amrita, let's watch that video.
Yes, sir.
And then we will come into this part. But just one point is the maritime development or infrastructure of Mumbai actually fueled the commerce, and it is a mutually collaborative game. But you talked about reclamation. Here's video 8, a little story of reclamation, which maybe most of you already know. And then we'll come to a very interesting part of Mumbai Port Trust. So Adarsh, video 8.
As the docks were developing, so were the areas around it. Causeways were being built to connect the 7 islands. Bombay was forever land-starved. It prompted the East India Company to start a major undertaking: land reclamation. Started by Governor Hornby, the Hornby-Vellard began construction in 1782. It was a dike built to keep the seawater out at Burley Creek, and 2 prominent places, Parel and Baikala, were reclaimed from the sea. In 1789 came the Duncan Causeway that connected the present-day Sion with Kurla, which was a part of Salsette. Later, Colaba Causeway came up to unite Old Woman's Island with Colaba Island. And finally, Mahim Causeway that connected Mahim with Salsette. By mid-19th century, from a group of islands, Bombay began to resemble a proper landmass. Bombay was gaining popularity worldwide as a port town, a budding commercial hub.
Bombay becomes a major port on the Arabian Sea. So you have ships coming from all across the globe, landing here, goods going out from here. Now you could have goods from the Deccan coming here to Bombay and then being put on ships. So cotton, huge trade in cotton.
Getting cotton into Bombay and shipping it out of Bombay harbour was difficult.
This was made possible with the first passenger railway line of India between Thane and Bori Bandar, constructed in 1853.
So all the goods came to Thana, especially the cotton bales, and then were shipped from Thana straight to Viti. And where they were emptied out at the Cotton Green, which is Honeyman Circle, in front of the town hall. And where the town hall stands today was all where the cotton trade was carried out. So it came straight in by train, it was traded right there, loaded onto the ships right behind it, escorted very often by ships of the line that maintained the sea lanes, and shipped out as fast as possible.
So, Amrita, before we go to the Mumbai Port Trust, you have been seeing stuff on the shipyard, shipbuilding. How much of Mumbai and its built infrastructure now fascinates you on specifically on this part? Tell a little bit about the shipbuilding and its contribution.
Yes, so shipbuilding really played a very important role. So that's where all of this came into picture. It's where all, just like I mentioned in the previous one, there was a lot of trade boom that took place. And that's where you see the city that you see right now, where you see all the, once you get out of Churchgate, there's a lot of buildings that you see right now, all these marvelously built buildings. And that's a result of the shipbuilding that has taken place. And that is just because of the sea. Is what you see Bombay right now. This is not the Bombay that you would have seen maybe 500 years before.
Great. And so one of yesterday, the team, we heard the chairman of Mumbai Port Trust, Rajiv Jalota ji, speak to us. And so the Mumbai Port Trust has put together this fascinating clip, again, built heritage. So Adarsh, let's have video 9, and that will really attract you.
As an harbour, I am witness to the progress of various landmarks within Mumbai Port which have stood the tides of time. Let me take you through each of them. The first of the present-day weight docks, Sassoon Dock, was built in 1870, now used as a fishing dock. First board meeting of the Mumbai Port Trust was held on 3rd July 1873 in Darbar Hall of the Asiatic Library building. Apollo Bandar, the site of present-day Gateway of India, was opened for passenger traffic in 1819. To commemorate arrival of King and Queen, a replica of Gateway of India was built here in 1911. Bhau Chadhakka, built by Bhau Lakshman Harichandraji Ajinkya in 1841 for the convenience of passengers as well as for ships to berth, load and embark. This included Karnak and Clare Bandars. I am witness to the construction of first lighthouse in 1850 on an island renamed in 1998 as the Kanoji Angre Dweep after the great Maratha naval chief Kanoji Angre. Let me give you a brief of various docks built by Mumbai Port to handle cargo. The Princess Dock was built in 1880 as a part of the scheme for improving my entire foreshore. The Victoria Dock was inaugurated in the year 1888. The Princess and Victoria Dock Traffic Office, the Ghadial Godi building, was the first building at the port. The foundation stone of Alexandra Dock was laid on 13th November 1905. With its large shades, the cargo activity was bustling. Various gates to the docks were identified with different colors. Alexandra Dock was renamed as Indira Dock in 1972. It is one of the largest dry dock in Asia. Currently, it is operated by Cochin Shipyard Limited. The Port House, headquarters of Mumbai Port, was built in 1873. Next to it, New Custom House built in 1924. Mumbai Port reclaimed 22 acres of land at Ballard Estate between 1914 and 1918 using material excavated from the Alexandra dock. This was a planned development executed between 1908 and 1914. During 1915, Mumbai Port developed its own railway system and constructed Ballard Pier Mole Station. Two very important trains started from Ballard Pier during early days, Golden Temple Mail and the Punjab Mail. Both the trains travelled to Peshawar in Pakistan prior to partition. Legendary personalities Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and Mahatma Gandhi travelled overseas by boarding ship at the passenger terminal. Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar visited Mumbai Port in 1948, erected at Ballard Estate. This war memorial commemorates the contribution made by the port in the British war effort. With railway network till the Vidarbha, cotton export from Mumbai port saw a huge growth. To manage this trade better, the Cotton Exchange was opened in 1924. The explosion occurred on 14th April 1944 in the Victoria docks of Mumbai, when the freighter SS Fort Steichen, carrying a mixed cargo of cotton bales, gold and ammunition, including around 1,400 tons of explosives, caught fire and was destroyed in two giant blasts. The blasts cut the ship in two parts, shattering windows over 12 kilometers of its radius.
So, Amrita, before I continue with you, let me just check if Janvi is fine in audio because it's time. Janvi, can you hear us? Janvi, if you can unmute, maybe we'll get you back because this is a good place. Otherwise, we'll continue with Amrita. Can the host help to unmute Janvi again? And Janvi, you can step in whenever you're able to unmute. Amrita, this whole time that this entire development was going on, some of the threats which were from the sea had been warded off. But there was a plan that began very early, as early as the 17th century. And that's your major research work that you are working on. So do you want to tell a little bit about the defense of Mumbai? So
yes,
talk to me
sure.
about it.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the research that I'm currently working on. So in the previous video, we saw that the Fort of Bombay that began to be built in the 18th century. So it actually provided security from the landward as well as seaward threats. But by the mid 19th century, the city was obviously blessed with an active harbor, trade and commerce at its peak. And that is the reason there was a huge rise in population. There was money pouring in. And that's when the Fort of Bombay proved to be very insufficient for the population. Much of this population had shifted their base to the newly opened town. The fort thus proved very insufficient to protect the town from a seaward attack, and that's where that's also when there was a fire that occurred, and the reduced security challenges from the landward side led to the demolition of this the Fort of Bombay. And then the officials thought of a new consolidated plan, a new consolidated coastal defense plan for the harbor defense of Bombay. So that's when in the 19th century, a plan was sketched out, which included construction of batteries at strategic locations to safeguard the busy Bombay harbor and the Back Bay. So subsequently, a number of coastal and island batteries erected on the eastern front to protect the Bombay harbor from attacks and invasions. So there were batteries constructed at Middle Ground, Cross Island, Oyster Rock, Butcher's Island, Malabar Hill, Colaba, as well as Mahalakshmi. So coastal batteries are basically equal to 3 naval guns, which are installed at these islets for additional protection. So when you visit Gateway of India, you tend to see the Middle Ground to the left and Oyster Rock to your right. So these fortifications are a witness of Mumbai's sea power and the political upheaval of the English and the other sea warriors. So you had Marathas who were battling with the English for the annexation of Bombay. But right now, when I'm researching, the condition of these fortifications, they're in a very dilapidated condition. Some of them have already been demolished, while some are struggling to survive. So,
great. Yeah, great, Amrita. We don't want to share more till the book is out. That will be a little away. And for the audience, some good people are guiding her. But I think I have Janvi back. And I think even if we have moved forward, Janvi, can I catch you back on, we see the British, whether it was a company or the crown, all these few centuries. And what was it that the Portuguese lost as an opportunity? What is it that the city gained with the British? Can you share a little bit of that?
Yes, sir. I hope the audio is better now.
Yes, you are clear. Go ahead.
Perfect. So let me reiterate what I was trying to say in the previous, when the audio glitch happened. So the Portuguese had used Bombay as a naval base in their conflicts at sea with the Mughals and the Siddis. The harbour was a small curve to the south of Bombay Castle and was described as a strong warehouse. The Portuguese in India considered Mumbai harbour as a lucky harbour and hence they were reluctant to give it up. Hence, the transfer of Bombay Island to the British was not without friction. And we've seen how Bombay becomes a part of, the dowry, and it slips away from the Portuguese control. The Portuguese had followed a policy of political and religious expansionism in the region, but unlike Goa, which was their southern province and prized possession, they did little with the northern province, except for running a few outposts and factories and collected revenues from the sale of its teak, rice and timber and other such commodities. So the Portuguese had used these islands for agricultural purposes and had not taken any major construction except for building a few causeways that were constructed to cross over the tidal flats. So I would say the English companies, for them, these islands were of great political and economic interests. We see that with the Bombay under British control, its fortunes had metamorphosed. They made maximum use of the natural harbour and eventually connected to the hinterland as their trade increased and as their profits maximized. The rise of Bombay coincides with the eventual decline of Surat. So the use of sea and the coastal territories, by harnessing the benefits that were offered along with a well-organized blue water navy, was one of the most important geostrategic policies that the English had foreseen and implied as compared to the other native and European rulers. In today's day and time, we have lessons to learn from these pages of history of utilizing our maritime frontiers for maximum commercial use, but also to keep it, we have to keep it environmentally sustainable, bearing in mind the changing and challenging times. So
thanks,
yes.
Thanks, Janvi. For the audience information, Janvi is not just a history buff, but she brings a family legacy from both coastal community, from her origin from Konkan, and her father was in the Bombay Port Trust. So there's a lot more of family interest. Thanks, Janvi. And with that, let's come to the war years, not warrior, but the war years. And so Adarsh, can we have the next clip on the war, and then we'll just interrupt and we'll be into the mid 20th century. Adarsh.
As the construction of Gateway began in 1914, Europe was gripped by the First Big War.
India's contribution to the war effort was enormous. As far as goods were concerned, troops were concerned, troop ships were concerned, refueling, bunkering, victualling, as in foods, this, that, and the other, all of it went out of India. And the Indian Navy was very, very responsible for convoying all these things to Europe for the war effort.
Thousands of Indian sailors lost their lives in this war. A memorial at Masjid Bandar stands as a reminder of their supreme sacrifice.
Business was not bad through the war either. Bombay flourished and in turn was contributing massively to the war effort. And the naval dockyard was absolutely running at capacity. Ships were coming in, they were being bunkered, they were being armored, they were being armed, they were being serviced, and they were being shoved out as fast as they could. Ships were bringing in all kinds of raw material for explosives, shipping out loaded to the gills. Transport ships were shipping out with soldiers. Ships were coming in with the wounded. Ships were shipping out again to bring the wounded back in. Britain needed India. Britain couldn't fight the Second World War without India. But the war effort would have been crippled irrevocably had it not been for India. India was where the warm bodies and the raw materials were. India was there for R&R. India was there to provide all kinds of requirements that the British had, especially since the British would be fighting on multiple fronts.
So, very briefly, war was fascinating. I've just put in the group. There's a book that MHS asked me to write even before I had joined. One of the key people was Commander Mohan Narayan to push, along with, of course, Admiral Nadkarni and Admiral Avti. Timeless Wake, that talks more of it. But there was a bit of a sad story a little after the war, and that is seen in this clip. Adarsh, video 11.
Post-World War II, in February 1946, practically the whole Indian Navy rose up against its British officers. They use it as one more evidence of its disaffection with the current state of affairs.
The Indian sailor who fought overseas came in contact with the idea of the modern-day freedom and liberty. It shaped the way he thought.
The Indian Navy between 1943 and 45 have expanded several fold. There were now 30,000 ratings in the Navy, all waiting to be demobilized.
Adarsh, there's one more clip in that same part. The second part.
Promises that had been made to believe promises that many of them would be absorbed or they would get a very significant compensation when they left. That did not happen. It was a very dangerous cocktail of events where the process of demobilization is getting stretched and you would have problems of food, they would have abuse. People with a sense of recognition what their entitlements were, it was a situation waiting to explode. The ratings who went on an uprising quickly had control over the communication centers and the uprising spread across the other Royal Indian Naval centers of Karachi, Madras, Kolkata. This did provide motivation for the transfer of power, which was supposed to happen somewhere in early part of 1948. And that definitely got hastened to August 1947.
20,000 men were involved in this event. Groups marched all over Bombay, shouting slogans, hoisting the tricolour on board Royal Indian Navy ships.
Yes, that was a sad part, but I want to bring in, along with Amrita, Ashwini. Ashwini, welcome. Ashwini is our archive and collection associate. You have been working with Amrita on making this whole story. Very few people know that there is a memorial to the uprising at Cooperage, right in the corner, tucked in. People think it's not accessible, but all you need to do is do a phone call, of course, with COVID precautions. So, Ashwini, why don't you talk a little what you have been discussing with Amrita on the MHS plans to transform this memorial and the whole role of awareness of our maritime history?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everybody, first of all. So as sir mentioned, MHS is very actively striving to bring the entire journey of the city of Bombay and looking at to the journey of city of Bombay through the sea, from the seaward side towards the land. So we are coming up with a lot of paperwork, research, and everything, which will help the citizens in Bombay to understand their own heritage. And we believe that one very integral part of this connection with the citizens is through museums and such heritage galleries, because objects and stories become very relatable and relevant when you can see them in some tangible way. Maritime History Society is working on a few projects which will actually bring these stories of Bombay into a very tangible way, as I mentioned. So the Naval Uprising Memorial that sir is talking about, as he said, it's at Sagar in Kuprech. Right now, it has a statue of an elderly rating with the helm. And it's very attractive to look at. We have also a plaques which explain the naval uprising that happened in 1946. We are planning to make a proper memorial with a gallery which will talk about the entire journey of the Bombay city and its connection with the sea. The museum will have the parts of it will elaborate the parts of what the videos that we saw now, the entire journey of the city. And we are also working on a gallery which will happen, a museum which will happen at our MHS office as well. We have a lot of objects which are directly relevant to the history of the city, and as well as the history of the Indian Navy, which, as we saw in the video, is a very, very integral part of the entire Bombay that we know of today. Over to you, sir, for
Great. Ashwini is very excited because some of my predecessors have built this whole system. They have worked very hard through the various exhibitions, through Vikrant when it was a museum, we have collections. And building on that legacy, we are able to go forward. So CSMVS is working with us in connection with Tata's. The Deccan Archaeological Cultural and Research Institute is helping us organize the collections and that part. But Ashwini, before I come back to Amrita, you have had twice a chance to sail on Antara. And when I mentioned about see the city from the sea, people are jumping. It's expensive. We need you to be open wallet supporters, and we'll give you in reward the return. So talk about seeing Bombay from the sea. Talk about Antara's trip.
Yes. So it was really amazing. The first time was amazing, and I thought the second time would be like, okay, ye first time kiya hai aur kya hoga. But no, the second time was equally amazing for me. Our initiative with this sail on Antara is to, as sir said, to actually let people see our city from the sea, because it looks completely different. We do the harbor sail, which actually shows the entire Bombay harbor that we know of. We just seen it through the maps, but actually seeing those entire skyline of Mumbai in front of you looks amazing. It is a very interesting initiative, a very exciting initiative from our part, which we are actually looking forward for people who would, and we are very excited. I'm so very excited to get people and take them out on the sea and show them the city from the sea. And it's very, very, very interesting. So we do yes, sir, you were saying something?
Yeah, so great. And we will not share more. There has to be something always attractive. I want to bring back Amrita. Amrita, I'll give you 60 seconds to talk about your favorite baby, oyster.
Okay, so Oyster Rock Battery is islet close to the Bombay Harbor, and we're currently planning of redeveloping it into a museum cum memorial. So I'm part of the museum cum memorial team where we're so the theme is based on the Maratha armor and the contribution of the Marathas to Bombay and the sea. So that's where, so it's in progress, and I think that's all I can.
Yes, right now, that's
now.
all. These all, we are in conversation. The state government has been very positive. The Directorate of Archaeology has been there, and we hope there will be an actual, the city will have things. Time now to come to a very important part. When we come to, we are now on 15th August 1947. And one of the participants of the naval uprising in 1946 was somebody who was 20 days older to Admiral Avti, Oracle Master of Kondoti, my father, and he's told me the story firsthand. And he was in Mumbai on 14th, 15th August, that night. The trams were free, and Bombay was in a festive mood. And that is this next video and how it leads. Adarsh, video 12.
It was a time for change. It was a time to celebrate. It was a time to reflect. There was a new wave, a new beginning. We were now the masters of our own destiny, and this reflected in the mood of the city. The ownership changed, but the age-old culture of trade would continue, and rightly so, the show went on. If the Bombay Castle and the Bombay Dockyard were to tell their own tale in the growth of Bombay, both could very justifiably say, Coram Pars Magna Fui, which in Latin means, I too played a great role. A city that was built over centuries by different rulers was finally back to its own people. A navy that stood guard over the city like a rock to serve foreign masters was finally free to serve its own people. The city and the navy, their destinies forever intertwined, their goals forever united, their legacy forever embedded in the earliest bricks that built a city, in the music of the waves that lash its seaside, and somewhere touch the lives of millions of people.
Mumbai has made an indelible mark on the world map. This has been possible due to a variety of reasons, most significant of which is its maritime character. The seas and the oceans have brought people of different ethnicities and different cultures to its shores, and their collective efforts have led to the so-called undying spirit of Mumbai. As Mumbai and the Indian Navy continue their future journey, their unique bond is sure to strengthen further. This will also lead to a secure and stable maritime environment and all-round growth and development.
By the way, we are not done despite the nature of that image. I have one more clip from the Port Trust to show, but before I go there, I want to give my gratitude. I will come to the ASM, but I want to be very grateful. For the last 6 years, 5.5 years, there have been some people who have been very indulgent of me, of this mad marine enthusiast who has had the opportunity. I have had the benefit of the best in uniform, sailed the far seas. But 38 years ago, on 17th of November, I arrived in Mumbai, stayed in Thakurdwar for a night, went across to Bhauchadaka next morning, joined the training ship Rajendra. And this city has been my city even if I've gone to other places and come back. 5.5 years ago, I had a chance to come back, and I was given the charge of the Maritime History Society, and a lot of people have worked together for us to have this fabulous team, to build this, to make movies, to have a digital presence. We need you. We need you. So I want to thank the various chairpersons, chairmen of the Maritime History Society. Now it's called the chief patron. When I came, it was Admiral Chima, then Admiral Lamba, Admiral Luthra, now Admiral Ajit, and the other people from Western Naval Command, the Naval Headquarters. You know, the Navy has been a backbone of support where I have been allowed to indulge. Then I want to come to this festival itself, Jashn-e-Dastan-e Mumbai, thanks to the Mumbai Research Center and the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, Dr. Geeta Kasturi, Dr. Vispi Balpuria, Shenaz, and the whole team, Ramesh, everyone. This is a collaboration which is just beginning. As I said, we are geographical neighbors. We can scream across if we use, you know, that a line and a matchbox, you can probably speak. That's the kind of distance. City needs to be built further, and not I'm saying construction wise. City needs to be built in the mind. We need to have people to step into the sea. You know, development is happening. I mean, you can't stop development. We may feel bad about it, good about it. The coming year is going to be fascinating, pandemic or no pandemic. In fact, thanks to the pandemic, we've gone digital. So I don't look at the pandemic as a problem. Stay safe, take precautions, and do everything. Let this collaborative journey, this city was built out of collaboration. Communities work together. As I said, the definition of Mumbaikar has changed. It's not a regional identity. It's a, it's an intellectual identity. It's a place where everyone has, it's the most egalitarian of places. And I've traveled to a number of places worldwide. It's one of the most egalitarian of places that can ever find, where you are safe and you have the capacity to put in effort. And the greatest thread of that, you know, spirit of Mumbai is the sea. I'm not speaking as just as a mariner, but can you ever imagine the city without the sea? And so before I close, I have one more clip, and then I will ask maybe some of the team. I'm looking at the time also. Maybe we'll have time for one or two questions, but let's play this clip from Mumbai Port Trust to see further transformation is possible. Adarsh, the final video.
I'm also a witness to the new, modern, state-of-art tourism and transportation hub at Princess Dock, where a kilometer-long stretch along the bay is already developed and open to the citizen of Mumbai. It has a domestic cruise terminal which is already operational and has a restaurant and a beautiful landscape for events. Amphitheater by the sea with a sitting arrangement of 300 persons. For children, a skating rink. RoPax terminal to ferry person and vehicles from Mumbai to Mandwa. As a part of Eastern Waterfront Development Plan, Mumbai Port is developing itself in the line of other famous city ports like London and Barcelona. A new passenger terminal, Mumbai International Cruise Terminal, is being constructed at the cost of ₹500 crore. I am proud of Mumbai Port, which has moved on since 18th century with these developments in hope that in centuries ahead it will grow in usefulness for the citizens of Mumbai and in commercial splendors.
Thank you, Adarsh, sitting behind the scenes, doing all this terminals. Even before I close, I think Renu or Anahita, whoever is hosting this, I saw a number of questions, but I think two questions mainly from the co-hosts which came up. Can I take that? And maybe we have about 6 minutes to go. I want to begin with Ramesh's question on the uprising. Ramesh, that's your question, no? The connection of the uprising and Indian independence?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, you know, when it comes to the naval mutiny, reworded as the naval uprising, and some people call it insurrection, Here is the perspective. If I speak as a naval officer, I can have nothing to do with a mutiny. I mean, that's just put that into perspective. One of the things in military training is you go along and you work things. However, there was a difference, and I remember my father saying this. The same Brit who was a fabulous mariner who would say, "Come, Johnny," and I'm talking about myself. Johnny was the word for everyone who was Indians. To my father, who was an electrical artificer, and who would be part and they fought the war together. The war ends, and the entire perspective changes. And suddenly racial discrimination, a barbaric form of things happen. Now you are talking about people who have traveled the world, who have seen what it means to enjoy your right and your freedom. The allies were supposedly fighting on the side of freedom. And there's a point when it becomes difficult. The quality of food drops, the interaction, the officers stop interacting. Much before the mutiny, there were investigations, and there was I think a Colonel Ansari, who it's written in a book, he had done a point. And then comes to a point where it boils over. Now, why am I answering? Like, yes, there are reports that Inqilab Zindabad and couple of things were there. I am very going to go firm on this on a limb and say, the uprising was a natural evolution. The setting was different. I want to be very clear, it was not politically motivated. If there was an inspiration from the INA story, then it was tangential. Only Aruna Asaf Ali came and addressed the people. What was more is these were people who were aware of a nation and its rights. And I think if situation, they didn't want to have a mutiny. They didn't want to have an uprising. But it shook the Britishers for a couple of things. A, the city joined them. The ordinary mill worker joined the ratings on the streets of Mumbai. The Britishers had survived even though the Indian community were the Lashkars and the people who supported the police and military. When they found that they could not trust these law enforcement and military institutions to be loyal to the masters rather than to the nation, the Britishers knew their time was up. So it hastened, but not in the manner that popular narrative would want to give a political color. They realized that this was a nation of people who had intelligence, who were brilliant. And in that sense, the naval uprising comes on the back, and it definitely was the straw that broke the camel's back. So Ramesh, I hope that kind of addresses you. This is what I would say, what I find a very objective look at it.
Should I read out the Venkatesh's question so you
yes.
don't have to scroll up?
Sure.
Yeah. His question is, why is the Victoria Dock and Princess Dock knowingly allowed to set up and close down? Is the MBT or either of its illustrious neighbors, Navy or the Mazgaon shipbuilding, going to find any use for the iconic docks, thereby saving them?
Okay. So I have had one privilege that as I said, I came to Bhaucha Dhakka, and then we used to go for a shore leave through Dockyard Road Station. I have seen the Hughes Dock, I have seen Victoria, I have seen Princess Dock, I've operated ships within, I have traveled across. So I've had the privilege of seeing those docks in prime, including when Coolie was shot, right opposite Rajendra. Today, I can say 38 years later, some of us actually jumped ship to go and meet Amitabh Bachchan. So, the fascinating journey of that entire place. I've seen Ferry Wharf in its glory. Here is the reality. There has been siltation. Mumbai Harbor is a tidal harbor. It's not a bay as one would popularly want to believe. It is not a bay. I want to go on record. It's not a bay because you have connected the northern part of the island. So, but it is sheltered because you are on the west coast. So it's on the eastern coast, and it has been difficult to maintain. So at some stage, development has to have a reality check, and they were struggling. Mumbai Port Trust was struggling. Mumbai Port Trust had years ago, decades ago, started developing Elephanta, JNPT, the whole set of things. There was a stage when sustenance was costlier than the returns. And I think I would give credit to Mumbai Port Trust. They have evolved well. They have turned it into a passenger come tourist. That is as far as the overall operations of the Mumbai Port Trust. Now, coming specifically to the iconic nature, I agree. And I also would be, from a heritage background, would say it must deserve heritage structure. Whatever I have heard of the efforts of the Mumbai Port Trust, they are mindful, but land is a commodity, and they are mindful not to repeat the journey of the mills of Mumbai. And that has been a fear. A lot of citizens groups have raised that issue. I have seen the plans, and they have some good things. Whether it is the most ideal plan, I think the city has evolved for many centuries. People have always opposed development. Yes, there are implications on local communities. There are implications on ecology and environment. But let's say this: let's invest to study the ecology and environment. People who oppose some of these projects do not have scientific data for anything maritime. When you have to make a tidal data, you need 100 years data. When you have to challenge ecology, you need 30 to 40 years. So we don't have. Let's build from today. So as a mix, I think there is a little collaboration with the Mazgaon docks. I am not sure about the naval part of it, and it is not yet final, but I've heard the former chairman, and I think Jalota ji is also very mindful. There will be a mix of heritage, come citizens, come development. And I would say, going forward, I'm an optimist, not because of me, because of the city. This city has always shown its character when it is required, and it will once again show. If someone does something different, I think time and tide will sort it out. It's not going to remain. So that's my part. Venkatesh, it will not be the most ideal heritage setup, but I am sure they will pay tributes to heritage. So thank you. It's past 1, and that's all. Thank you, Asiatic and the team, for hosting us. We've enjoyed ourselves. I hope you had fun.
Comrade Johnson, you've left me absolutely speechless with your wonderful presentation. I don't know whether to thank you for the maritime history that you've shared with us, or for the mentorship, the team building, the management skills, the presentation skills that you've shared with us. All of us have absolutely enjoyed this session. And along with you, I want to thank each and every member of your team. Sabha, Aishwarya, Dena, Janvi, Amruta, and Ashwini. And if all of them can switch on the video, Venkatesh, you can take a picture of...
and Adarsh, why don't you come up also? The man behind the scene is...
Oh, yes, absolutely. That'll be wonderful.
Okay, come on, guys, switch on your cameras. This is the official part. Okay, I'm very serious with them, but they know that I crack the most pathetic jokes, and I'm ill-famous for that.
And so thank you also for sharing your personal anecdotes and making most of all Mumbai your city.
Yeah, it's
and
definitely.